Greeting viewers, thank you for joining us today. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi warmly welcomes both our local and global audience to the continuation of our African Book Talk series. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi is part of 9 regional hubs positioned around the world by Columbia University. The centers serve as platforms for dialogue and the exchange of knowledge in research, education, as well as public programming like we are having here today. Thank you so much for choosing to spend time with us. We are still going on strong with our online programs. Perhaps one of these days we might consider having a hybrid session where we'll have people coming into our center. We love visitors. So today we are privileged yet again to feature an amazing African queen by the name Adele Onyango. Adele is a Kenyan media personality who has gained international recognition for her efforts to empower African women and youth. She has been celebrated as one of MIPAD's top 100 Africans, Facebook's 2019 Icon of Change, Africa Youth Awards 100 Most Influential Young Africans for 2019, OK Africa's 100 Extraordinary African Women for 2018, and BBC's 100 Inspirational and Innovative Women in the World for 2017. Adele also runs key initiatives through the Adele Onyango Initiative, one which bridges the skills and services gap between amongst Kenya youth, and the other initiative provides sexual violence survivors with access to free psychosocial support. She also hosts the Legally Clueless podcast, which documents human journeys for everyday African people. The podcast now plays on Trace Radio every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday morning. It is also available on Google Podcast, and we'll be posting the extended bio on our chat. Clearly, Adele is not only living, but she's also making real impact in our community. It's truly an honor to have you today, Adele, on our show. Our moderator today is Wendy Njoroge. She is a bookish curator, entrepreneur, community builder, podcaster, and reading advocate. Her work is invested in making African literature discoverable to a wider audience. As I said, we will be posting extended bios on the chat area. For our audience, kindly note this program is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. As we proceed, please post your questions under the Q&A section, and remember to follow us on social media. We will post our social media handles in the chat area. Follow us. We have many more exciting programs coming up. I now hand it over to Wendy. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for that introduction. And thank you so much to Adele Onyango for joining our book talk series today. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you. I think from the moment I saw about the publication of the book and what it stands for, I was really excited because I think that level of visibility, that level of bravery on its own needs celebration. So thank you for honoring our invite to join the book talk series. We hope we'll engage with you for perhaps the next hour. And then I'd like to encourage everybody on the meeting. If you have any question, please drop that in the Q&A section. There's a Q&A section at the bottom that will make it easier for us to see the questions, which our guests will be taking as we go along.
Thank you. I think I'll just jump in and just say a big thank you for the kind words at the beginning. Turned off my camera so that you don't see me blushing And I thank you, Wendy, as well. And I'm really glad to have this conversation. I'm really glad that you were following, our journey. Publishing and writing a book through the pandemic is hell. But we kind of managed to do it. And unfortunately, my co-author, who's an amazing Kenyan woman called Lanji Okawori, couldn't be with us here. She's actually in between Kenya and New York, so she wasn't able to be with us for this session. But I'm very, very honored to be called on here and to just talk about, the journey that has been our broken silence. And I think, publishing, writing in a pandemic is hard, but the marathon has only started now. I'm learning that now about writing your own book. And but we're up for the challenge. I think we have something very powerful we've done. Yeah.
I completely agree, and I think you will represent the book really well. But what was that like? What was the inspiration? I'm curious to know at what point you and Lanji decided, okay, fine, this has to be a book. What was that process like for you?
Oh, I have to really thank Lanji for that. I think in our lives, we always have, and I'm saying we because I'm just assuming everybody in this session has gone through it, a bit of imposter syndrome. So you feel like certain things are not meant for you at a certain point in time, or you're not worthy enough. And I'm just thankful that I'm doing it with another African woman so we can nudge each other to just get those fears out of the way. But it initially was not meant to be a book. When I left radio, so those who don't know, I was in traditional radio as a radio presenter for 10 years, and then I left in 2019. And I left to really get into the digital space. I could see the potential, and I just wanted to do a lot more with storytelling and African stories in particular. I didn't want to be in the box that is the studio. I wanted to be outside where life happens. And so when I left, I started 2 podcasts. And one, of course, has been mentioned, which is Legally Clueless, that's grown to be its own platform. But the other is Perspective. And Perspective was a gender podcast. And I wanted to be able to bring men and women together to kind of do a cultural audit and see what are some of the issues, what's the genesis of some of the issues that we have, sexual violence included, and just wondering, how did we get into this mess where, it's so difficult to be an African woman, to be a woman really globally. It's just like, how did we get here and how do we right those wrongs? And it was a live podcast with an audience. I was merely just like a moderator. They were speakers and everything. And so Lanji saw an episode of this. She was in New York at the time, and she reached out to my team at the time. And she was really interested because she'd done this research on sexual violence in East Africa. And, she was now interested in sponsoring, coming on board as a sponsor for one of the episodes. And then I happened to be in New York that year. I think that was 2019. And so we met, she came, I went for a performance, she came for the performance, and we talked and we just connected. And we were really set on this thing just being a podcast episode. And the more we dug into it, the more it was like, this is maybe a series of episodes. And the more we kept digging, Lanji then said, I think this is a book. And my first reaction was like fear, which, I'm trying to unlearn that. Is like, oh my God, can I really do this? Is this, people work for like 30 years and then they write a book. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready for this. But, the more we talked about it, the more we dug in deep, the more we realized, oh my gosh, this actually will be doing a disservice if we keep it as a podcast episode, because there's so many stories that we can amplify, so many points in our history as East Africans that we can shed a light on, even from pre-colonial times. So how do you fit all of that into a podcast episode? It's nearly impossible. So Beginning of 2020, I then signed the book deal and began this, we were celebrating before we knew the world was going to go into lockdown. And we were like, okay, great, let's get to writing. And then we went into lockdown. But that's how it began. It was meant to be a podcast episode.
I'm glad you touched on perspective. And now that you mentioned it, I remember that is something I think I'd seen on your social media some time back. So is that still a thing that you're pursuing, or,
To be quite frank, I think when I left radio, I panicked a bit. I had never run my own business. I mean, I'd been employed for 10 years, right? So I panicked and I just went into overdrive, which is sometimes a good thing for a creative, because then you create on overdrive, right? And I think I underestimated the workload and the commitment to do these 2 podcasts and to do it well, right? And I think at a point I realized, when the pandemic hit, I realized that I was spreading myself thin, and perspective requires so much intentionality, because you have to create a space that feels safe enough for everybody who occupies. So the women who come in are free enough to speak and to say, this is what I go through as an African woman. The men who come through, same thing, whatever gender identity you have, this is a space that, you're having really tough conversations. So I remember it used to take me like a good 2 months to try and figure out who is going to be the speaker, how are we, and I used to have to break down the topic, like really, and I'd have my notes with me there. And so, business-wise, I just really realized that it was either I was doing it alone or not doing it at all, because it requires so much intentionality. I will never say never, because who knows, I might bring it back. I might tell you today, oh, I'm done with perspective. And then next week you see me relaunching it and you're like, is this woman mad? So I'll never say never, but it needs intentionality, and both of them, they're like really demanding children, right? And so they need my attention. But I do recognize how important perspective is in terms of dialogue. But I think through the book and the plans that we have for it, there is an element of perspective that is coming out, honestly. So it might not come back in the form you knew it as, but who knows?
I mean, yeah, and I think we just have to allow ourselves. We always start out with a plan, but then the plans have their own plans. And I think it's just about allowing ourselves to flow with, whatever feels is time for it.
Yes.
I'm glad you've touched a bit on looking at the historical context to try and understand why are we here. And before you maybe take us there, maybe you can briefly say what the book is about, who it's for, and why it was important for it to have a historical context, starting with pre-colonial. And
okay, so I have a copy of the book here. This is actually my copy. I don't want to bring it close because I carry it with me everywhere. So it's like, it has marks from my handbag and all of these things. But so the name of the book is Our Broken Silence. And basically what it is, it's stories of survivors of sexual violence, and some stories also from members of their support system. And by support system, not only family members, but people, let's say, in the medical space. So there are all of these systems that are meant to be supporting survivors, but we know are not really doing the best job. And it's stories not only from Kenya, but from the greater East African region. And it's stories not only from present day, but from pre-colonial times to during colonization, to like the 80s, the 90s, to present day. And I think, it's a bit sad, because, sometimes people are like, oh, that's so rich. There's so many stories and stuff like that. But in my heart, I wish there were not so many stories, and especially from such a grand space of time, we're talking decades. And, you know, we're not only talking about women from a particular tribe or only women. We're not only talking about women from a particular race. There were, during, you know, pre-colonization, intercolonization, obviously we had the influx of people, Indians, into, let's say, the country and the region. And the Indian women also went through sexual violence. So there those stories as well. And I think why that it's important, it's almost like a pause. This book is almost like a pause to say, okay, clearly something is not working in how we're approaching this issue, because how in the world can we still have all of these stories, right? Something is letting us down. So where is that issue? And even in terms of who this book is meant for, I think it's meant for everybody. Initially, myself being a survivor as well, obviously the key, and you'll see it in the book, so in terms of dedication, the first dedication is to other survivors, because I think when you're walking that path, it can get very lonely and you can feel very just alone, and you can get so angry. I know I was there, like so angry, especially when you see mismanagement of things that directly contribute to our lack of safety as African women. And so it can feel very lonely. And I wanted first to ensure that survivors don't feel lonely, don't feel ashamed, because it's not your shame to carry. And then just kind of like, you could possibly see parts of your healing journey in other people's stories. That's one. And, you know, some of the things I think in my chapter that I talk about that I've not seen being spoken about is just like, you know, going through sexual trauma breaks a lot of things in your life. I'm still, even now, discovering parts of my identity that are still very broken. And, you know, I experienced it in 2008, and I'm privileged enough to get access to therapy. But I'm still now like finding out, oh my goodness, this whole corner has been broken and I've not known, you know. But issues such as like some of the things I wrote about around rebuilding your sexuality, first and foremost, it's taboo to talk about anything sex, you know. And then as a woman talking about anything sex, and then a step further, you want to talk about sexual trauma and then rebuilding the sexual parts of you as an African woman. Oh my goodness, what are you? Keep those things in your therapy rooms and in your head. Don't bring them out. And I think I had never seen anybody write about that or speak about it, you know, in our, you know, on our continent, I dare say, because the only publications I had dealt with that speak about those things is a particular publication from the UK, you know. And so I wanted to be able to talk about those aspects of healing that people just don't want to go towards, you know. That's one. But also I've had like a lot of second tier people that I feel this book is also for, is just even other women who haven't experienced sexual violence. I think women are just so magical, because every woman I've given a copy of this book to, or who has bought a copy of the book, has told me like, oh my God, I know someone who's doing this and they can help with this. And I think that's so magical, wanting to be part of the solution. That's so beautiful. And then there's men who have read this book, and quite a few of them have been like, wow, this is really heavy. And I'm like, yeah, can you imagine? This is our life every day, you know, imagine how heavy that is. And just having men also introspect, because it's very intimate reading a book, introspect and ask themselves, how are they part of the solution, if at all? And then also, you know, at our launch, we had members, people from the judicial system, people like our Chief Justice, and just really just saying, hey, you guys are not doing enough, right? And we're kind of tired of it, and we want certain things changed. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying to that question about who is this book for, it's really for everybody. It's really for everybody, because this is a pandemic in itself. If you think about just women and our safety, and just I think our forward is by the Chief Justice, and there's a sentence she wrote about, if we don't fix this, then the question will be, who will be the next victim? And it's like, we don't even want to go there, you know? And yeah, so I'm also like hearing feedback. It's interesting to hear feedback about what the diary entries, you know, the introspection it sparks from the people who read them.
And I love that how you put it. And I guess the title then becomes very apt, Our Broken Silence. Because I think for especially sexual violence or gender-based violence, there is always that clock of silence, and aided by shame and reinforced by society. It's sort of you as a victim, you suffer the crime, you suffer the assault, and secondly, you are not also allowed to, you know, to voice it. You're not allowed to even say that this thing happened to me. It's sort of like you're putting a mirror in the society and you're making them uncomfortable. And you don't see these victims of other crimes, of other assaults. I mean, if you got knocked down by a car, God forbid, nobody would shame you for that, right?
Yeah.
So why this particular crime? So I guess my question to you is that how has that been like taking on a very visible role to, first of all, claim that, yes, I am a survivor, and 2, I will not keep quiet about it, and 3, I am reaching out to other people that have been through this thing. And I guess that because I see trolls online, and I see how people are attacked for suffering, you know, and for building. How has that been for you personally? And even just coming back to the book, because now, you know, when you write a book, it's a permanent record, you know, you can't change your mind about it. So how has that been, using that path of visibility, knowing that clearly there are people who are uncomfortable with facing the truth?
To be quite frank, I think when I initially chose the visibility, because that was like years before the book came on, I think I did it very naively. I didn't, you know, at the time that I was opening up about it, not, the internet was still this like cool place where you'd go and meet your friends from high school, and like people were generally nice on social media. It was not terrible, you know, it was not, trolling was not even a word because it was not even a thing, right? And then, you know, with time and the more vocal you get and the more uncomfortable you make people, because you're forcing people to confront truths about themselves, and people can get very defensive about that, then the trolls come out, you know, and it's not been easy. I think I remember one situation where a local artist kind of like made up a rumor, and this time I was on radio at KISS, made up a rumor about him and I, which was, it was just youth, I think, on his part. I was much older, so I was just like, this is just a child. But that whole day, I was trolled for 24 hours. Like, that was my first time being like, what's going on with the internet? And I remember the one comment that I still remember to date is somebody telling me that the way I look, no wonder I was raped. It even looks like I got HIV, like just such. And it was a time when I think the amount of characters you could tweet was like, it was very little. It was 160 characters. And I remember thinking, Yanni, this man has just chosen the most vile words to fit into this. And I remember, you know, at the time I was pushing something. So I had an interview after work and and I got into my car at like 10 p.m. and I just cried from that particular comment. The rest, I was like, whatever, it comes with like the industry I've chosen to be in, and it's lies anyway, so what the hell. But that one, I was like, wow, like we actually took it there. I've had instances where, and I think this one I actually talked about in the book in terms of how it destabilized me trying to love my body again. And it was another male personality, with this whole boy child movement and whatever, saying that I'm not, taking a photo of me, posting it on his page and saying I'm not attractive enough to be slept with willingly, let alone be raped, and having to, I remember sitting down with my team at that time and trying to draft my response, because I was like, okay, this is a teachable moment. And it's so sad that I had to think that I can't be emotional, yet somebody has attacked a very emotional space of my, it was just so surreal and so weird. And again, I remember just being like, what in the world is going on, and like what's happening? And so, it's not been easy. And I don't know if I knew that's what awaited me, if I would still like have done it the way I've done it. But what I can say is that I do see small improvements, and I have to really commend African women and Kenyan women, because there are moments when I've been attacked online, and there's just this like army of women that shields me to the extent that I don't even have to engage myself, and it's people who I may know, it's people who I may not know. So that's, I can't express like enough gratitude for that, because there's a lot of strength that I derive from those people in those moments. But I also have to say, there's parts of me that feel it's very unfair that as a survivor, I have to navigate my healing. That's also very expensive because Kenyan government not wanting to like look into mental health properly. But, and then I also have to do this work because I know I don't want to go through this again. And if we don't solve it, what are the chances of that happening? The possibilities are very high. So it's like parts of me gets very angry when I interact with people running other organizations and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a survivor. So I'm like, what? Are we just the only ones who are now doing the work? Like, where's everybody else? Because it will not be efficient that way, because we're not the ones propagating rape culture. We're not the ones who are perpetrators. Like, come on. So it's a bit difficult. And like writing was also a bit, I can't lie. There are triggers that were like revived while writing, and they were triggers that were born, like some that I've never experienced in my life, have come back. And it's kind of like collateral from having to write about things that I haven't confronted in such an intimate way. So it's not been easy. Hey, it's really not been easy.
I'm just sitting here and just my heart goes out to you. And you knowing the cost that comes with being vocal and still choosing to do it. I'm just commending you for just taking that courageous position, because I think silence is a very powerful and common, weapon against victims. We have people that even in families, if this thing happens, the first thing is, you cannot broadcast our shame. Or if it happens in the workplace, is that, are you gonna paint this company in bad light? So the burden is again shifted on the victim. But and I think you've touched on something that I see, and I think we can start working around that thing, which is language and how we use language to shift responsibility.
Oh yes.
And decenter the proponent of the crime, right? So we'll say this person was raped, but why don't we say X raped this person? And what other ways have you seen language like just, perpetrate this thing? We as a society, we are also like, just making it more difficult by shifting the burden back on the victim.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought this up, because it's one of my pet peeves, to be quite frank. Just like the example you've given, when they say, Kilifi County features a lot. I don't know what goes on there, but they really need to like figure it out quickly. But they'll say reports like, I'll just say a random number, so like 30 women raped this month, instead of maybe saying, they've been 30 rapists, maybe only 10 have been apprehended. You know what I mean? Like breaking it really down to kind of help us understand just even the failures and the gaps in how this issue is addressed. I think our media has forgotten in many issues, but for now, we'll talk about sexual violence. They have forgotten their watchdog role. And traditionally, whether you're on a digital platform or not, as media, you are the watchdog, right? And so how can we know what the gaps are if you're not playing your watchdog role well? Another thing I've seen that is very weird in how we cover issues around rape, issues around sexual violence, is we really go to the ends of the world to sanitize perpetrators. And I'm pretty sure you've read stories like, he never drank, he has 3 PhDs. He's
a good father.
He's a good father. And so I'm just like, wow, those are many words you're putting to kind of like defend this person who, regardless of whether he enjoys alcohol or not, has committed a crime, And it's always, I've seen articles like that, and I'm always wondering, like, what was the end goal here? What was the point? That's 2. And even the third thing is like, we don't even bring kind of like experts, Instead of writing all of those words, it would be nice to have a psychologist actually write about sexual trauma and what that journey looks like, and maybe even share some tips. You don't know, they could be survivors reading this article. But you are so focused on sanitizing this man that it's like crazy. Another thing is, and this is more societal, I mean, the media, as much as I'm part of it, I can go in on some of the very strange headlines and articles that I see. It's like, even just how, if you look at something like teenage pregnancies, right? There is an element of lack of comprehensive sex education. That's one. And actually, comprehensive sex education includes conversations around consent. So it does actually kind of like has a relationship with sexual violence, and that's trying to solve it. That's one. But we also know that we have teachers who are predators, right? So if you write your article and you're like, 30 students were impregnated, it's like, by who? Like, like, what are you telling me? You are the media. You're meant to bring complete stories to us. You're the watchdog. So when you leave it like that, it's just like, what are you saying? But bringing it back to like society and you and I, who actually have a role to play, it's even in like, the language that we use, the memes we share that are so wrong. I heard that and this was from a perspective episode, that some men say when they buy a girl a drink, they call their phrases like, oh, Mereka Shua bet, which, is like, oh, you've placed a bet, which then is saying that you must get something. So you know what I mean? And so you're normalizing very harmful things. It's like, no, what are we doing? And you find that there's groups of friends who we know there's this one guy who's always so persistent with ladies, and we're okay with that. Why are we okay with that? Why are we not calling out bad behavior? Why are we not calling out rape culture? And I think everybody kind of has a role to play. And for men, what I've seen is that if you call out, first, I find that you get defensive because you probably have crossed the line or like toyed on the line a bit. So you're kind of introspecting. And if that's the case, now you know better, now do better. It's as simple as that. And so you don't want to call out your friend because then they'll be like, hey, but even you see, you normally share and you did this. But I keep telling men, for you guys, it's a social cost, right? When you call out bad behavior in your friend circles, it's just a social cost. For women, it's a matter of life or death. So what side do you think is worth defending, right? And so I feel like the language is very violent, both on a media level. It's very irresponsible the way things are covered. You'll see the questions of like, they'll put a married woman raped at 9 p.m. when she went so you're just like, what's going on here? Like, what are you trying to imply, right? What is the actual issue? The issue is she was raped. Who raped her? Where is the rapist? Have they collected evidence? Where is the case? What's going on? That framework is kind of missing. And I think everybody has a role to play, and we're currently just not playing our roles.
I mean, yeah. What stood out for me with this book, and I think I'm seeing as it's something that is coming out even in your other work, is using stories as a way to form community, as a way for people to engage and have discussions. Like with the podcast you had mentioned, Legally Clueless, there's all these stories, and even for Our Broken Silence. So how important are the stories in us, perpetrating change and making us think differently? Because I think from what I see is that when you give people statistics, then it dehumanizes things, and people think, oh, okay, 50%, I don't even know what that means. But if somebody has their own account, lived account, there's always it lands better. So maybe if you can speak a little bit about, is that probably the reason that you chose to do this as essays, as people's personal accounts, because then people are able to see themselves? Because I think there's been extensive research that still feels very clinical and 50% and all of that, which is well and good for scientists, but then how does that look human?
I think, first and foremost, I absolutely love storytelling. I think it's like if you look at my computer is just like doing weird things. If you look at even just culturally, across very many African cultures, storytelling is such a key part of how we passed on lessons, how we passed on stories of where your family has come from. And I guess with like modernization, we've kind of lost a bit of that, but it's very important in whatever context for storytelling to still be an integral part of how we figure out our identities, how we figure out social issues, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very powerful, and we've not really tapped into its potential, And then I also think, especially for Africans, I think one of my pet peeves with like traditional media was that it was just like, even in pop culture, it wasn't stories that made it, you would just talk about gossip and whatever. But even these people you're talking about have stories, they have life stories that are very valid. And we wouldn't really get to understand who this person is behind the song, behind the music, and hey, even behind the scandal, right? And that kind of like didn't sit too well with me, because the more I did my advocacy work, the more I'd meet like fantastic Africans just like doing amazing things, and I'd be like, so you mean to tell me if I didn't travel all this way, I would never have known of this person, I would never have met so and so? Like, that's a problem. And so for me, with Legally Clueless, it was very important to make sure every African knows that their story is valid. Obviously, we have a bias to African women because there's a bias in everything I do for African women. And it's also to create a space where African women can share whatever stories, like without any shame, without any, it could be stories around like dating, about mental health, business, whatever it is that you're going through, without feeling less than or feeling like, oh, it's improper for me to say this or that or whatever. That was very important for me. And so it's something that I carry into every space. And I'm very happy that Landry, my co-author, also believes that when it comes to storytelling. And I always say this when I'm in like the advocacy spaces with my organization. I'm like, you NGOs are really speaking to yourselves, because when you tell me 1 in 3 women, it's so distance, isn't it? And it's like, which 3 women? And it could be women from another county. It could be, you don't really like understand that this is a big issue. But when you read a story and somebody's talking about a street that or it could be something as small as their name is like a name, someone, or oh, that's from this community, or you kind of can relate with it in some sense. You start to understand that there's human beings behind these numbers. And I think to some extent, the NGO world has like dehumanized social issues and just like lumped up us into a number, which I don't think is right or fair. But then obviously there's that, for me, it's very important for us as Africans to tell our own stories so that it's unbiased, it's uncensored, and it's not from, oh, look at these struggling Africans, man, we've got to solve their issue. Like, that is such a played out narrative. Because, I mean, if you look at issues like sexual violence, my word, it's across the globe, you know what I mean? And so it's like, you could learn from us as well, like in terms of solutions, you could learn from us. And for that reason, I think it's very important for our stories to be told by us in a way that we decide, and on the platforms that belong to us. And so books like this, Our Broken Silence, is very important, because it's not someone external coming to say, man, look, now all these African women, man, they need, it's us really doing an internal audit and saying, hey guys, we're calling a family meeting, something's not working, and it's not been working for a couple of decades. So storytelling is important, but I think it's very important for Africans and because even if you bring it down to African women, we can't have, let's say, because we're in a patriarchal society, we can't have African men speaking about our lived experiences or trying to tell our stories on our behalf. No, that's something we have to do for ourselves, right? So storytelling is important, but it has to be in an unbiased, uncensored way and done by the core. Who are these people who are leaving these stories? Can we amplify their voices and not try and dictate what their story needs to sound like, what's proper, I think that has happened to us on the continent for too long, until we thought things like sexual violence didn't happen on other continents. We thought things like poverty, you travel to, America. I know I did, for the first time in 2018. And I was shocked. I was like, this poverty thing it seems like it's really lament you guys, like, because I have never seen anything like this at home, and you're just like thinking, what? We're all going through the same thing. So why are we made to feel less than and like that unfortunate sibling, And I think with our stories, at least even for this, there's a lot of powerful stories. There's stories from the queer community, but it's told in a way that honors that storyteller. Yeah.
I 100% agree with you on agency. I mean, everybody can speak for themselves. There is nothing like a voiceless person. And if the person is voiceless, there's sign language. So like, perhaps you just listen to that person as opposed to labeling them as voiceless. I see we have a question on the platform. Maybe I can read that out for you. And
Okay.
if you'd like to take it right now.
Okay.
There's Marcella who's asking how can we, or what do you think we can do to dismantle societal norms and expectations for men that encourage toxic masculinity? There are many ways to be a man other than harming and degrading women. For example, how can we convince men that kindness, sweetness, respect, and generosity are incredible masculine qualities?
Yeah.
Again, as a woman, you'd be limited to advice of how a man can be a man, but give it a shot.
No, I feel very strongly about this. And I'll tell you again, it goes back to, like, in my opinion, cultural audits and just looking back and seeing what's working and what's not. So I remember once being on radio and having a conversation about, at the time, there was a child who had died, a 13, 14-year-old child died. And, the postmortem showed that he died from blunt force trauma to the back of his head. And he had just come back home from this circumcision rite of passage. And I've grown up in like a house that was just like estrogen central, like no men. So I didn't know. I was just like, why would somebody come back with blunt force trauma from this rite of passage? What in the world is happening at these things? And so we had a conversation about it. And, some men were calling in and saying how, they go through it maybe between, I stand to be corrected, but like pre-teenage into like early teenage years, right? And some of the things they say they would experience is like, you're forced to eat a lot of food because a man must eat like huge servings. And so some of them were saying you'd eat until you'd puke. And I'm just like, who thought that's sane? Like, that is very absurd to me. That's one. You were told you can't cry, like, no for showing emotions. That's not manly. No woman can tell you anything, including your mother. The kitchen is not a place for you to step into. Some of the other things we had, the beatings. So like, you would be beaten there during this rite of passage. And then like, you go through like you're a group. So it's like a cohort of you who have gone through. And at any point in time, when the older ones see you anyway, they can just come and start like hitting you with jabs. And I was just like, what? Again, what is this teaching? What skills, what knowledge is this passing on? And so you go through this rite of passage, and those of you who know, between the ages of 12, or let me even say 11 to like 15, 16, these are formative years, there are things I'm dealing with in therapy that are specifically from that time period in my life, right? And so if at this point you're breeding and conditioning monsters, should we really be shocked that a couple of decades later, we're like, having all of these issues that we're currently dealing with when you talk about gender issues and how men relate with women and objectification, things like that? No, we shouldn't be shocked. And I think it's like, again, going back to the cultural audit, I'm not saying our culture is terrible, but I'm saying there's some very problematic things inside it that we need to go back and be like, who is this serving? Where did we learn this from and why? That's one. I think also there's a huge misconception. I never understand when we say we're fighting as feminists, as women organizations, as active African women, we say we're fighting the patriarchy. This is a system that, we get a lot of like blowback from men. So the trolling I spoke about earlier, etc. And I never understand it because I'm like, do you understand the system we're trying to break is also oppressing you? Like, if we dismantle it, it frees you as well from very unattainable male expectations where it's like, he must be the provider in this economy alone. How? There's unemployment, for heaven's glories. It's a thing, right? All of these expectations, I think you can link them to the high numbers of suicides, and it's more men killing themselves than women. It's more Black men. It's more men even in this country of ours. Why? And I think it's really rooted in some of the just unattainable expectations that we have for men, that if you sit back, you're like, this doesn't make sense, right? And these are expectations that are rooted in patriarchy. So if we say we're fighting the system that is suppressing women, guess what? It's also suppressing men. So you may want to join us in refiguring this thing out, you know, because it's also hurting you. And I genuinely think it's an identity thing, right? And it's an identity thing. It's not enough conversations men are having for themselves, and those are things that I can't solve for them. In like trying to rethink, what does this new identity look like? Women have organized themselves very well. We have, I mean, not to say that we're not liberated. If anything, we've just begun the work, and we're standing on the shoulders of like the women before us, right? And the work they did. But we are organized and we are building communities. I don't see men doing the same thing. I feel like there's not been an acknowledgement or understanding of how this current system is oppressing them as well. But that is not work that I can do. You see me, I'm doing it from the outside. I don't fully understand the lived experience of an African man. I can kind of see like, that stuff. I can see unemployment, and I can see that, dude, running a household on a one income in this economy is a bit tricky. So I really think that if we would be honest, you know, and if men, and I say this generalizing because they are male allies who listen and who try and be ambassadors for us, but like, I don't think there's been a good enough amount of work in understanding how this system oppresses men as well, and how the power, you know, it's like, but at what cost? I mean, they do have an access to power that we don't, but at what cost? You know?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you, and even co-opt Chimamanda's words to say that we should all be feminists, and I think would be a better society for it. But I see we are approaching the last minute, and so I'd like you to just take an opportunity to tell everyone in the audience, how can we support the work that you're doing, the purpose for the book, how can each of us individually support and push the cause forward? So please direct us.
Yeah, so the book currently, it's on Amazon for those who are not in Kenya. And if you're in Kenya, we are now going to also, we started off being only at Somanami, which is a femme-owned bookshop, but we are now going to be at Textbook Center in like a couple of days as well. And we're also going to be doing a lot of activations going into the season. And really what's important is to highlight the issue around women's safety and sexual violence, even as we're going into election periods, because I'm not hearing enough of that from any of the candidates, to be quite frank. And so, you know, if you get a copy of the book and it's 2,500 shillings, all proceeds go towards two things. One, it was mentioned earlier, I, under my initiative, have a Safe 247 program. It's built on the ethos that all women deserve to be safe 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's a free group therapy program for survivors of sexual violence. We build the curriculum with psychologists and a curriculum developer. And we just want to be able to, even if somebody doesn't have the privilege that, you know, one needs, unfortunately, in terms of accessibility financially to access therapy, there is this program that can help. So that's one place that the proceeds go to. The second one is really run by Lanji, my co-author, and it's really looking at, it's a microfinance fund to help survivors get back on their feet, to help survivors get access to legal services as well. So by purchasing the book, you're actually helping us run and keep these programs as sustainable as possible. So I would urge you, if you're able to get the book. The second thing is if you do get the book, share it across your networks for other people to know about it. And not just in Kenya. Again, this is a book that really amplifies Africa's voices on a particular issue that is affecting all of us. So even if your networks are not from Kenya, I think you can still share it with them. And it's really been so amazing getting feedback from people in Germany, like taking photos saying, oh, my book has arrived, or in the States. And it's just so heartwarming to see them, want to join in and want to help us push it forward. The third thing is, as we're going into, as I mentioned earlier, this is a marathon. So we're going to be doing a lot of book readings. We're going to do a lot of activations, and not to give anything away, the book is really just the anchor for a lot more of the activities that we're going to be basing around this. So if you follow both Lanji and myself on social media, my social media is Adele Onyango on all platforms. You can be able to tune into these conversations, let your opinion be heard, but also learn and introspect and think about what your role is. I would love everybody to get out, even just this conversation we've had, to get out and think, okay, even in my workplace, how am I making this space safe for women? I own a business. How am I actually prioritizing women's safety? Before I ask that from my MP and from myself in my house, in my business, in my workspace, what am I doing? What is my role in this thing? And really it's not our book, because yes, co-authored by Lanji and by Lanji and myself, but we're not even on the cover, we're not on the front, and we both just have chapters, but it's a wealth of other stories. So we want you to own this book and use it as conversation starters in your own spaces. I think for me, it's just support all of the engagements we're going to be doing. Yes, buy the book, but keep it going. The book is just the anchor. Let's not lose sight of the end goal for us, which is ending sexual violence. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think the book signs off with that line, and the violence and sexual violence. Thank you so much for everybody that has joined us. Thank you, CGC, for always organizing these book conversations. I have a great time hosting. I learn a lot as well. Thank you, Adele, for making time. For everyone on the chat, thank you for sharing your encouraging words. Please go ahead and follow the movement that Adele is still continuing. Lillian, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Wonderful work. Thank you, Adele. Your photos look beautiful. I like your backgrounds, all of you today. Wonderful work. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, Adele. It's an honor to host you. And we'll buy the book to support that initiative. But,
sorry, I just saw someone say that I should hold up the book. That's why I was doing it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. To our viewers, we really appreciate and honor your presence in this meeting. It's for us, it's a privilege to have you on board, and to keep you updated of our upcoming book talks and other webinars. Please follow us on YouTube and Facebook, as well as our social media channels like Twitter, LinkedIn. Sandra will be posting them on our chat, so that I think she has been doing that all through. So we really appreciate if you follow us more. Again, as Pauline stated, we will be soon transiting to hybrid meetings, and we'd love to keep you posted of our hybrid meetings that will be coming soon. So we are glad to have you on board. And thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Sandra, and the rest of CGC team for making this successful. And with that, I want to wish you a beautiful day, evening, night, morning. Thank you so much, and bye.